The gospel for today is from 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 4 through 11. There are many different gifts, but it is always the same Spirit. There are many different ways of serving, but it is always the same Lord. There are many different forms of activity, but in everybody it is the same God who is at work in them all. The particular manifestation of the Spirit granted to each one is to be used for the general good. To one is given from the Spirit the gift of utterance expressing wisdom. To another, the gift of utterance expressing knowledge in accordance with the same Spirit. To another, faith from the same Spirit. And to another, the gifts of healing through this one Spirit. To another, the working of miracles. To another, prophecy. To another, the power of distinguishing spirits. To one, the gift of different tongues, and to another, the interpretation of tongues. But at work in all these is one and the same Spirit, distributing them at will to each individual. Good morning. It's a great pleasure to be here with you at TLU today. Through my sister, Nancy Hirschfield, I've heard many wonderful stories about the college and its people, and so I'm delighted to finally be here and experience the college in person. Thank you for honoring me by allowing me to spend a few minutes on a subject I know many of the students in this room are thinking about today. What am I going to do with the rest of my life? How many are seniors in this room? Well, for you, this question is particularly vexing. It's now second semester, and so I recommend that even if you don't have an answer to that question, you make something up. Because you're going to undoubtedly be asked often, what are you going to do next? Let me begin by telling you a little bit about what I've done with my life so far. I graduated from Luther College in 1976 with a degree in history and German. For the next 5 years, I experimented with different careers. I taught English as a foreign language in Japan. I was a member of a management training program at General Mills in Minneapolis, and I worked on a political campaign in Iowa with my husband. I got married in that 5-year period too, by the way. I then got my MBA at the University of Pennsylvania and began a 25-year career in the mutual fund industry. I left that full-time career late in 2006 and now serve on the board of directors of 3 corporations. I'm the chairman of the board of Luther College, and I do work in Africa, which is the subject of my talk today. Throughout these experiences of vocation, I almost always enjoyed my work. I learned a lot, I grew a lot, and I contributed as much as I could to the organizations that I was part of. I honestly never felt a sense of call, but I did feel that I was, to quote Corinthians, using my gifts for the general good. One of the things I love about these verses from 2 Corinthians is that they encourage us to explore work that is a fit for our skills. And they highlight that those skills, those gifts, are all gifts of the Spirit. In other words, the Spirit of God is not just involved when someone decides to become a pastor or a social worker or a doctor. In this set of verses, the phrase of the Spirit is repeated with each and every vocation, so that people who lead, people who heal, people who impart knowledge, accountants, carpenters, clerks, their gifts are of the Spirit, and their work is God's work. Very recently in my life, I experienced what it means to be called, and I'd like to share that with you briefly. Our family was finishing a 3-week safari vacation in Kenya and Tanzania, so I was refreshed in body and spirit, a state of mind that for me at that stage was not that common. I was a senior executive of American Express Corporation, and my life was scheduled from 7 in the morning until about 6 at night every day. And so I think one of the prerequisites, in a sense, of experiencing call is to actually be in a position that you can receive a call. And at that time in my life, I was in a position to receive a call. On January 1st, 2006, in Nairobi, Kenya, I met Lutheran pastor Peter Ndungu, and he told our family his life story. At age 11, Peter was orphaned and left on his own in Kibera, which is Nairobi's largest slum. In Kibera, the homes are mud-walled, tin-roofed, single rooms about 8 by 8 feet. They have no electricity, no running water, and no easy access to toilets. Most often, there's a pit latrine shared by 200 or 300 people. Peter began going to a nearby Lutheran church every day because they had a feeding program so he could get 1 meal a day. And through this process, he befriended the Lutheran pastor of that church, who ultimately helped him get a World Vision grant so his schooling would be paid for. Ultimately, Peter finished primary and secondary school and went on to become a Lutheran pastor. He's a charismatic person with a wonderful personality, an entrepreneurial spirit, and a ready smile. He was selected by the Bishop of Kenya to come to the United States to do graduate study at Luther Seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota. And during the time that he was there, my college roommate was his pastor. So when Peter and I met, he was back in Nairobi, serving a parish that borders a large slum. And in this neighborhood, there are thousands and thousands of children who have been orphaned by HIV/AIDS, in whose lives, of course, Peter saw his own life. After telling me his story, Peter asked me a question that changed my life. Do you think you could find people in the United States who would sponsor children so they could go to school and have a chance at life, like I did? He thought it would cost about $400 a year to pay for a child's education. As I look back on this exchange, I believe now that it was a divine moment in my life. On a normal day, I feel very confident that I would have been moving too fast to even consider responding to Peter's question with more than a gift of money. But when a question like this comes prior to a 17-hour airplane ride, we met at 7 o'clock in the evening, and at midnight I boarded an airplane. And that trip took 17 hours, and it was the end of a 3-week vacation. I had both the time and the capacity to think about it. I felt a strong sense of God's presence in the question Peter asked me. Could I find people who would commit a modest amount of money by our standards to help some of the poorest people in the world, some of the poorest children in the world get an education, thereby giving them a chance at life? Of course I could. By the time we landed, I was convinced that I would respond to Peter's question. We would create sister nonprofit organizations, one in the U.S. and one in Kenya. The U.S. organization would primarily raise funds, and the Kenya organization would manage the program. The beginnings of a plan were taking shape. So as soon as we got home, I actually had to get off the airplane and drive for 3 hours to take my daughter back to college. The next day was the beginning of her J-term, and she didn't want to miss even a day. So I spent the night in Decorah, which is where she was going to college, and the next day was driving home. Now, radio frequencies are spotty in that part of the world, and so she had some CDs on the CD player in the car, and so I listened. The first song to play was from a Disney movie that you may remember called The Prince of Egypt. Anybody remember that movie? The lyrics caught my attention, punctuating the conclusion that I had already reached. A single thread in a tapestry, though its color brightly shine, can never see its purpose in the pattern of the grand design. The song goes on and concludes with, so how do you measure the worth of a man in wealth or strength or size, in how much he gained or how much he gave? The answer will come to him who tries to look at his life through heaven's eyes. At that point, on my drive home, I laughed out loud to think that God somehow needed to use Disney lyrics to be sure I was getting the point. But I did get the point. Today, we have more than 300 children being supported by Friends of Gong Road, and their pictures have been scrolling behind me as I've been speaking. They are getting educated in good schools. They get at least 2 meals every day, and we provide a range of support services to enhance their chances of success. My talk today is called Saying Yes, and my message for students here today is simple. You have been richly blessed with many gifts, loving families, a wonderful education, and a chance to make a contribution. Use your gifts with joy, whether or not you feel a call. But when you get God's call, do your best to hear it and then say yes. You will surely have lives that are blessed beyond measure. At Luther College, the motto that we often use to conclude talks is a Latin phrase called Soli Deo Gloria, and it means to God alone the glory. So Soli Deo Gloria. Thank you.